Namaste, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. It is my great honor to be speaking before you. I'm supposed to speak on mind and consciousness. I don't know if that's an appropriate theme for the evening, but we will look into that. Vamadeva was the rishi of the fourth mandala of Rig Veda. And there's an interesting statement as he says he learned the Vedas while he was still in the Garbha, or the womb, in which he investigated the births of all the devas. But actually that Garbha is the heart, where all the devas take their birth. The devas are the sense organs, the motor organs, the pranas, the different aspects of the mind. So it all is symbolic. Vamadeva as a rishi is in Upanishads when they have the teaching Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, and that doesn't mean the ordinary I. It actually means that Supreme Self is my true self. They quote Rishi Vamadeva, Aham Manu Abhavam Surya Cha. I was Manu and the sun. Manu being not just Manu as a figure or a king or a teacher, but as the primal human being, Purusha, and Surya as the Atma. And he's also associated with Aitareya Upanishad and Koham, that search for the self, Koham, Soham, He am I. And he has a number of major mantras, including the Hamsa mantra. Hamsa, Soham mantras come from Vamadeva's lineage. And Vamadeva was in the Gautama line, Vamadeva Gautama. And they were the Purohits of Videha, which includes now North Bihar and extending into Nepal. And they were, of course, Videha is known for where Sita came. Sita was born, and Sita was also born of the earth. And the kings of Videha were called Janaka, and the kings of Videha were famous for their Atmagyan, their self-realization, as in the dialogues in the Upanishads between Yajnavalkya and Janaka, and also in some of the other texts. Now, recently I've been more involved in this study of mind and consciousness, of course based on the Vedic tradition and Vedic teachings, but also in a more practical and experiential way. And so I want to discuss that, and also relative to science and relative to medicine indirectly. In the world today, in the world of science, we have the three things: brain, mind, and consciousness. The world of science, they're all the same. Mind is a function of the brain, consciousness is a function of the mind, consciousness may have some other annotations as well. But in the Vedic thought, the three are related but different. And consciousness is mainly what is unknown and what we actually most of the time do not have. Mind has its own reality. Part of the mind is connected to the body. Another part of the mind, with the karmas and the samskaras, can go on to another body or another birth in its seed form. And so if we look at the philosophies of India, and I would say maybe even all the philosophies of the world, there is one very crucial and important insight that India has given. Sometimes it's attributed to Upanishad, sometimes it's attributed to Kapila Muni. And it's very simple, is that the seer is different than the seen. If you observe something, it doesn't affect your consciousness. If the eye sees things, if a cup drops on the floor, it doesn't affect the organ. If at a deeper level, you can observe your thoughts. So tracing back, what is the essence of your being versus the outer things that are seen or observed. Now, in the Sankhya system, this becomes the duality of Purusha and Prakriti. Prakriti is not simply nature. Prakriti is the essence of what is seen, the essence of all observable qualities, starting with the three gunas of sattva, rajas, and tamas. So in that sense, as we look deeply, we see that, of course, the body is observable to us. Our thoughts are observable to us. So actually, our inner awareness is something more. We will look into that a little bit in more detail later. And what this means is that what we call mind is not ours. Mind is part of Prakriti, and mind is characterized by a mixture of consciousness and unconscious, or subconscious. We all know this. Our minds are filled with memories, compulsions, habits, desires, influences, conditionings, karmas, and so forth. So mind is a reflected consciousness, and mind is the not the source of consciousness. Even the Buddhists tend to use the term mind for both mind and consciousness, but in the Buddhist tradition they usually speak of the original nature of the mind, or the bodhicitta as the Buddha mind, as more the nature of consciousness. So here I want to go back to the Yoga Sutras and some of the discussions we were having today about science and also pramana. And you have the 5 vrittis of the chitta that, of course, are examined. You know, the pramana, the knowledge, the viparya, the error, vikalpa as the imagination, smriti as memory, nidra as sleep. I will add 2 more, sankalpa as motivation, and bhavana as emotion. So now the interesting thing that we have to realize is, how does Yoga Sutra start? Yoga chitta vritti nirodha tadadrashtu swarupe avasthanam. Yoga is the nirodha of the vrittis. It is not the functioning of the vrittis. It is not the goal of the vrittis. It doesn't even use the vrittis. It wants the vrittis to be nirodhan. What does nirodha mean? On one level, nirodha means total concentration. On another level, we'll discuss that a little more later too. On another level, it means negation, neti, nirvana. On another level, it means turning something back to its source, taking it back to where it comes from. And then the second part, the drashta, the seer, is the pure consciousness, the Purusha. The chitta is part of the Prakriti, or Maya. I'll bring in a little bit Vedanta. We can rather loosely identify Prakriti, the processes of nature, with Maya, which is the realm of appearances, with avidya, which is a limited knowledge. I want to explain those things a little bit more. Hindu Dharma is often criticized for calling the world Maya and saying everything is unreal. That's not what it means. When we're calling the world Maya, that is just simply the fact. What does it mean? The world consists of various appearances that must be investigated for us to figure out what they are. When I'm looking out at you, I see your faces, I see the clothes that you wear. I don't necessarily see the real person at all. To get to know someone, you have to be around them, be with them, investigate. All of life is that way. What do we teach children? That they can't just take appearances to be real. They must know how to measure distance, how to measure time, how to know who to trust and who not to trust, how to know what is a fiction or a story and what is something real. We live in a world of appearances that need to be investigated, and no matter how long we live, we never end that investigation, or at least very rarely, and discover the ultimate truth behind that. I have a little line I like to tell about science. Ever since we as human beings have been on this planet, we have been obsessed with measuring reality. We have created so many systems of mathematics and measurements and numbers, and we have so many machines and systems to do that today, all the computers and everything measuring more and more. But however much we measure reality, there is always something left in the end that is immeasurable, and that is the reality. So that is the Maya. And just as there is that appearance outwardly we have to investigate, there is also an appearance inwardly we have to investigate. You are not your thoughts. You are not your memories. You are not your imaginations. They're related to you in some ways. They're changing, they're developing. There is something also in you, a deeper awareness, a deeper self, a deeper being, we can give it different names, that needs to be investigated and known. That is the Vedic pursuit of knowledge. So, if we look at the Vedic knowledge, we have many different vidyas, you can call them sciences to some degree. And if we look at modern science, of course, there are also many different branches of science. But the ultimate science is the science of consciousness. And that is what India has given the world in so many different forms and in a number of different teachings. And that is what needs to be preserved and developed and understood. And that is what we do not know. And here we can also draw some cultural comparisons. In the Western world, the ideal human type is the great intellectual, more or less. Whether it's an Einstein, there's so many different names that of these great intellectuals that we have. In the Vedic system, the rishi or the yogi is not an intellectual. They may be an intellectual. It is someone who has transcended the mind, gone beyond the mind. Veda Upanishads say, Atishu Krameti. One goes beyond the human seed, the human karma, the human conditioning. So, mind is embodied consciousness. It's embodied intelligence, we could say. It's creaturely. It's individualized relative to a particular jiva or a particular organism or expression. Consciousness, in its pure or true form, is a universal presence like space or like light. It is not individuated, and it is not a mind. And in that respect, what we call self, in the true sense of the word, is our inner being that is rooted in the consciousness. Now, this is a complicated thing, needs some investigation. We also have our physical self, which is the I am the body idea. And we also have our mental self, our I am the mind. We have a physical self and a psychological self. They cause us a lot of trouble, but we're still not quite willing to let them go. And if we look at going back to our original insight, that the seer is different than the seen, then you can see that you are not the body. And the idea, the self-image, when most would say, we think of you have a self-image. And that is an image of you as a body, right? But who's having that image? See? The one who is having that image is not that image. See? The one there is a deeper consciousness behind that. So our self-image is a mixture of a conscious factor, a subjective factor, self, with an objective thing, body. And so it's a confusion, subject and object. And in the confusion, it limits or reduces the self to the physical organism, which is to bring in factors of the unconscious, the habitual, the karmic, the compulsive, the conditioned, or the limited. So, there is this deeper self that we need to search for. Now, if we look at the mind, like the body, is an organic entity with various functions that we can observe and use, very much like our computer in some ways. In the Sanskrit thought, we call the mind antakarana, which means inner instrument. The body is bahyarkarana, or the outer instrument. So as we say, I think the Brahma Kumaris had that. Your body's like your automobile. It takes you places in the material world, but it's not you. Your mind is like your computer. It has all this memory software. You need it to function like your computer, but it isn't you. So if we look at the mind, it has these functions like memory, but your memories are changing. Some you forget, they're mixed with emotion, imagination. You are not your memories. You are that which has the memories. You can also forget the memories and transcend and have that knowledge, awareness directly. Emotions are things that affect us very deeply, but transiently. You are not your emotions. They are certain states of nature that you undergo. When you're angry, anger possesses you like a ghost, just as it possesses any other angry person. When it goes away, then you forget about it. So I do a very interesting thing every night before I go to sleep, and that is to do this movement. Another way of discussing Nirodha is detachment, vairagya. Another way is what we call disidentification. It's not stopping the mind. It's not preventing the mind from functioning. It's no longer identifying with the mind, which means you gain the ability to turn the mind off and on as a tool when you need it, but then you let it go. It doesn't drive you. So what I do is, and we can do this as a meditation anytime. First, you can look at the physical body. What is the physical body? You have the motor organs, hands, feet. You have the sense organs, the eyes and ears. You have your internal organs. You claim you're the body. You've never seen your internal organs. You really don't know what they are unless you're sick. And you don't feel, when somebody shows you a picture of your stomach, that that's me. And all these are held together in the saptadhatu, or the tissues of the body. So if you look at it, it's an instrument. An instrument is designed to either gain knowledge or to do things. But you are no more your body, your senses, than you are a telescope or a microscope or a hearing device. And you are no more your motor organs than you are other instruments or devices. You know, half the time you're not using your hands, or you're not using your feet, or you're not, the senses of taste and smell aren't used so much. You're not even in there most of the time. And even if we look at the body, you're mainly in your sense organs, not at the surface of the body or outside your body, rather than conscious or inside the body. So I start off with that, developing withdrawal of the consciousness from the body. As a natural letting go. And then you can move on to the mind. We've already discussed how memory is, just a collection of experiences in your mind, but you can let them go. In fact, I won't go into the roots of psychology, but one interesting thing we found in working with people at a psychological level is a lot of the memories are toxins, and people don't want to let them go. And people are often more attached to their grief and their sorrow and their negative emotions than they are to their positive emotions. But if we look at the mind, we see functions. Imagination is a function of desire, visualizing the future, planning, or even dream. And if we go back to the other functions of the mind, we all have sleep. One of my current projects, I'm finishing a whole book on the 4 states of waking dream and deep sleep. What is sleep? Deep sleep. Deep sleep is a blankness or a darkness. It is the ignorance at the root of the mind. Until we awaken from the dream of physical reality and go through the darkness of deep sleep to the light of awareness, we are living in the realm of mortality, maya, and illusion. So mind has these functions. Your computer has a lot of the similar functions. We have the function of reason. We think reason is something that makes us human, but reason is also a mental function, not a direct awareness. And here in Yoga Sutras, again, they talk about the vrittis of the mind. And what people forget, the chitta vrittis are not you. They don't belong to the Purusha. Yoga is not about the chitta vrittis. It's about the nirodha of the vrittis. Detachment, disidentification, neti, letting go. You don't need the mind. The mind needs you a lot more than you need the mind. In fact, the mind is where you're storing all your karmas. And the mind has the pranic knot to the physical body, generally through the Nabhi chakra. And It's holding that constriction which causes pain and suffering, rid of emotion, and so forth. So why is the Yoga Sutras teaching you the 5 vrittis of the mind? Is to detach you from them. Because whenever we cultivate the awareness of the observer, the seer, the knower, the witness, then that detaches us from that particular object or instrument that is involved. So we talk about pramana, pratyaksha, direct perception, anumana, logic, agama, or shabda, authoritative information. In fact, there's no true knowledge there at all. What do we mean? The chitta, its knowledge is of Prakriti only. It cannot be knowledge of Purusha. It can be knowledge of, we can even say it gives you knowledge of Maya, gives you knowledge of name, form, and number. And this is one of the great insights of Upanishadic thought, para apara vidya. The apara, the lower vidya, is name and form, but I always say name, form, and number. They're all there together. Higher knowledge, atma vidya, akshara, that which is eternal, beyond name, form, and number. So if we begin to look at that, we see that most of what we call knowledge is in the realm of the lower knowledge, or what is also called avidya. Now, avidya is one of the key terms of the Vedic thought and of the Indic thought, but it's also one that's also misunderstood, and there's no equivalent for it. It doesn't mean ignorance. It means a limited or separative knowledge. The senses show us something, but they don't show us the whole. No one is totally wrong, but they're not totally right. Everybody's right according to their own point of view. Everybody says that we should all be rational, and they think that what they think is rational, and what everybody else thinks is irrational. So we have to come into contact with and confront that basic avidya behind our lives. Our knowledge is limited, so ultimately we do not know the nature of reality, and we do not know who we are. And the world is not what it appears to be. It is not entirely different. And we are not who we think we are. We are not entirely different. One of the best Upanishads is, of course, Kena. And there we have this idea of knowing and the unknown. Above the known, also beyond the unknown. We are trying to know. But what are we trying to know? We're trying to know some object or quality or force or instrument on the outside. If we want to know ourselves, what do we do? And so if we want a science of consciousness to develop, it can't develop like the material or outer sciences. It can't follow the same theories, the same logic, the same evidence proof, the same group of people sitting together talking about it, or it cannot be analyzed by instruments. Now, this doesn't mean science cannot help us out a lot. Modern science is understanding brain waves, brain chemistry, has a certain place. We can discuss that in certain ways to deal with that, particularly vis-a-vis the Ayurveda. But it's like measuring a person by the movement of their shadow. That can help you tell where they're going and maybe something about their size, but it doesn't tell you who they really are. So confronting the fact that we don't know is also part of, and that our knowledge is an avidya, it's not a complete vidya, it's a partial knowing that gives us an illusory sense that we know. For example, we all have sense organs, right? Now, we think that the sense organs give us true knowledge, right? But take, for example, does a hungry man and a man who has satiated seafood the same way? See? Our senses are inherently chronically programmed because why? Our senses are the instruments of a particular organism, and they have the biological imperative to sustain that organism. They don't have the imperative to know the absolute truth. On the contrary, if the truth goes against sustaining the biological organism, that truth, of course, will be rejected. So our senses, our cognitive senses, are also colored by imagination and desire, wanting, and they are also motor organs. They encourage us to do things. What we call mind as manas is working to connect the sense organs and the motor organs, which get crossed over in various ways. So we need to learn this art of self-examination, self-inquiry, and going deeper into the consciousness. And that can only begin when we recognize the limitations of what we already have. So even if we put in these pramanas together, what we end up is at best knowledge of Prakriti. Purusha cannot be known that way. Now, the same question arises. Whenever we need to know something, what is our instrument of knowing? What is the appropriate instrument of knowing to know something? For example, if you want to see a distant star, it's not going to help you to build a better microscope. There's nothing wrong with a better microscope, but it's not the appropriate instrument. And this is the other great insight of all the yoga traditions, is that there is another pramana, or capacity of knowing, that can be developed out of the mind. And this is called the samadhi pramana. This is the nirodha. So when we have that ability to create the detachment, negation, disidentification, however we want to put it, the mind can become like a mirror and reflect the reality, reflect the Purusha, rather than responding or reacting to the qualities or identifying with the qualities of Prakriti at the level of karma and conditioning. So turning the mind into the direct instrument of knowing. That silent mind, that state of nirodha, is the instrument, the basis of any science of consciousness. Science of consciousness can only be known through samadhi. It's not that we're discriminating against people who can't have samadhi. It's not that we're denying the validity of other instruments of knowledge. It is the important instrument. But for that to occur, there has to be a fundamental change within us. And in this regard, Yoga Vedanta, it's about a change of consciousness. It's not about a change of mind. We're changing our minds all the time. And it's about what is called knowledge by identity. You understand things through reflective identity, being one with them. It's not a knowledge of name and form. So this also gets us back to this question of the self, the subject, who we are. And if we look carefully and think carefully, it's very simple. The self is not an object in the field of the mind. There is no true self in the field of the mind. Why? Because in the field of the mind, there can only be Prakriti, there can only be qualities, appearances, ideas, images, things that are on the outside only. The self, true self, is an inner dimension. So to use the mind to discover the true self is what we call turning the thief into the policeman and sending him out to find the real criminal. And of course, what he'll do, he'll just rob you further. Now, a change of consciousness is not just simply moving the body differently. For example, asanas are very good, but you're moving the body differently. They don't necessarily bring about a change of consciousness. They can help to some degree. And also, it's not a change of thought. We're changing our thoughts all the time, and our consciousness is basically, even today, with all of our technology, the human being is the same. In some respects, the human being is more disturbed and more unhappy because we've lost our organic basis of life. So we have to look into, accept the fact that we don't know who we are, and look for a change of consciousness. And also then, yoga always involves a sadhana. I've told this story before, but the Upanishads, the disciple comes to the guru and asks for ask a question, and the guru says, go into the forest and meditate for a year and come back, I'll give you the answer. Why? Because the knowledge by identity also connects to what we call experiential knowledge, knowledge of being. It has no conceptual content, and we have to experience that through a change in our awareness within this entire process of disidentification. And it also then requires a sadhana. It requires a long-term practice. There are no such thing as the schools of Vedic philosophy. They're darshanas, they're ways of seeing. And in the darshanas, they all honor samadhi as a pramana. We were talking recently with Lama Sentan, who is the main teacher at the Sarnath school for the Tibetans, and he made the same point. Buddhism, Jainism, Hinduism, we all accept beyond all the whatever theories, philosophies we have, that samadhi is the ultimate pramana, which takes us beyond any conceptual boundaries or limitations. So we need to cultivate that. So if we go back to Yoga Sutras, yoga is defined as samadhi. Chitta-vritti nirodha is the definition of samadhi. Not total samadhi, nirvikalpa, but the ability to take the mind into that state of direct awareness, direct concentration, and move beyond the vrittis. In fact, in yoga, we also have the chitta bhumis, the levels. And to move into the yoga bhumis, you have to have the ekagra chitta, or the one-pointed mind. In the Vedanta, they also call it the akhanda vritti, which means unbroken or unstopped. In other words, the way to transcend the mind has to be made one-pointed. The mind cannot be transcended if it's in a distracted or disturbed or stimulated, vulnerable state, or dominated by the gunas of rajas and tamas. Rajas and tamas in Ayurveda are the doshas, or the disease-causing factors relative to the mind. So actually all the 8 limbs of yoga are angas of samadhi. Yoga is samadhi. And every aspect of yoga involves turning within, detaching, letting go, slowing down, and moving into the seer, Purusha, the knower, and letting go of the seen, the prakriti, the qualities, and so forth. So even yamas and niyamas are the principles of right living that allow us to karma, and they are also then allow us to gain control, self-discipline. You know, people also talk about control of the mind, but that can also be a misnomer, because it's not the mind controlling the mind. It is also not the ego controlling the mind. It is the, is this going on in the back? Okay. I don't want you to lose your mind yet. Okay, are we back? Okay. Okay. So when we talk about control of the mind, it is a control by detachment, not by the effort to control the mind. And there's a very interesting principle at work, is that whenever we observe, we gain control at a deeper level. And the observation comes with honesty. So to create detachment, you cannot try to be detached. But if you're honest in observing your attachment, that is the beginning of detachment. You can follow it out. So this whole Nirodha process is going through all the yoga sadhana. Even when we look at the asana practice, asana should be letting go of body consciousness, not looking at myself in the mirror. Am I really doing this asana good? It's impressive. Letting go of the body consciousness. That's why it's this relaxation into infinity, letting go. And pranayama, our biggest knot is the prana. Pranayama is detaching the prana also from the body. It's not dying. It's getting rid of all that pranic attention that we are holding, which is mainly invested in the self-image and the sense organs, the motor organs, the pranic activity, and so forth. That is why when pranayama is mastered, one experiences what we call the inner prana, the prana of prana, the unitary prana, not the outer dualistic prana. That can go on, but we're observing that. In fact, we can say relative to the pranayama, 10 minutes, okay, is that you have never taken a breath and you will never take a breath. The body breathes, you observe the breath. Now, so we need to then withdraw. Pratyahara is also the way of nirodha, moving, detaching from the senses. And then dharana, we create the one-pointed mind. Dhyana moves into the reflective state. Samadhi becomes like the mirror, and Atma can be revealed. And this process also involves what we call the awakening of the buddhi, or the awakening of intelligence, which is the highest function of the sattvic mind, the satya buddhi. And now what the Vedanta does is the opposite of yoga. Instead of chitta vritti nirodha tadadrashtra supirasa, they begin with atmadarshana. Understand yourself and samadhi will follow. This is only possible for a very high level aspirant. It's not something anybody can do. Mainly we have to work on the senses, the prana, and all those other things. So we have within us that universal self as our true being. It's not that I, so-and-so, this person, that person, and self-realized or knows the self. In the Atma, there's no person. There's nobody there. There's no one who could know it, and there's nothing to be known. There's no one who could realize it and nothing to be realized. There's a state of pure light, pure being, pure awareness, and the body and mind can be used as instruments as needed, but they no longer define our activity. We're no longer defined by our instruments. And then when that occurs, higher parts of the chitta become aware, higher potentials of the mind, including the yoga powers, faculties, and all of that, siddhis, all the rest of it, and there's some circumstances may come out. So in other words, sarvam kalvidam brahma. All this maya is only Brahman. We haven't looked at it deeply enough or investigated. There is one ocean of Satchidananda, and the material maya is the waves at the surface of the sea. We haven't gone deeply enough. So too, aham brahmasmi, I am Atma, Brahma. Each one of us is that Atma, but we haven't gone deep enough. We're stuck in the mind. We're stuck in the body. We're stuck in our psychology. Psychology has been a big, problem for us because we get caught in analyzing the mind rather than in understanding our true nature. So through the yoga and the Vedanta, we have the practices and also the theory, the view, the knowledge, the vidya of this whole science of consciousness so that we can understand the universal reality, the universal self. And if we have that science, we can integrate, we can use all the other sciences as we may or may not need them. We can go beyond technology if we need to do that. All that potential is with us, and India has preserved that knowledge, that vidya, and that needs to be developed. It's coming into psychology and medicine somewhat. I won't have time to talk about that now. But it is developing more and more, and I'm happy we have other speakers here who are very great experts in the field who can continue in this approach. But that inner self is your true reality. It is the reality of all. We can play with the Maya. It has its beauty and its lila, but let us not forget that essential reality, which is what the rishis taught, the yogis taught, the jnanis taught, and is the essence of the Vedic knowledge and what all the Vedic vidyas and what all higher forms of knowledge are leading us to. Shri Guru Pyo Namaha.